in the old days, in hostage negotiation, bosses would say, when is this going to be over? And I would always say, when the bad guys feel like they've got everything they could.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work and how that work is changing all of us. Today, I want to take you back to 1993, to a corner in Park Slope, Brooklyn. There's an armed bank robbery occurring at that very moment. I mean, a national headlines bank robbery. The NYPD got involved, and eventually the FBI. Now, what turned the tide on this conversation, it was actually the work of one person. That person is Chris Voss, the lead negotiator for the FBI. On that day, he figured out how to get inside the bank robbers' heads, to figure out what they really needed in order to be able to truly de-escalate the situation and walk away feeling like they had won something they hadn't fully lost. And walking away feeling that way is why those employees of that bank, well, they got home safely. Now, this is just one early example of the magic of Chris Voss. We had him into the studio here at LinkedIn for a very special conversation with our premium users. In fact, if you are a LinkedIn Premium member, you can catch the full conversation. We'll drop a link in the show notes. It's really worth it. Today, we bring you the highlights from that conversation. Chris wrote a book on negotiation. It's an international bestseller and really one of the best books I've ever read on the topic. It's called Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. He's got a very specific style, and the best part about it is that you can learn it. Like, really, anybody can learn it. Today, Chris and I are going to go deep on some of the techniques, whether you're negotiating your salary or just trying to get your teenager to give the keys back at the end of a night. They're going to work for you. I promise. They've really worked for me. Here's Chris.
There's a phrase I love, never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. So you got to be very careful about being locked in on what you want, because it means you're probably going to miss something better.
So flexible mindset.
Flexible mindset. And then, winning with people gets you farther as opposed to winning at the other person's expense. You win at their expense, then you've hurt them and they don't want to cooperate with you in the future. They probably want to pay you back. So, how do you also, you're trying to end up in a better place, but even your mindset, your inner voice betrays your outer voice. If you're not trying to beat them, they won't get that feeling. They're going to be more open. So winning is to start with just being better off after the conversation's over.
So, Chris, it sounds to me like one thing I hear you saying is that to win a negotiation means that whoever you're negotiating with walks away also feeling they have won the negotiation.
So I love use the word feeling. Because I've been getting kidded about that a little bit. I just finished a one-man, one-night show on Broadway. And we talked about negotiations, and in the old days, in hostage negotiation, bosses would say, when is this going to be over? And I would always say, kidnappings, when the bad guys feel like they've got everything they could. And then I'm telling the guy that wrote the show, we're talking about bad guys' feelings, how people feel. So the real issue is, how did you feel about the process? Were you respected?
Yeah.
Were you heard? And then you feel vested, and you probably start to feel good about whatever happens if you're respected and heard. So making the other person feel like that they were heard, they were involved. They're far more flexible to where things are going to go after that.
Chris, I'm just going to say that you have become a real expert at understanding how someone is feeling. Do you have any quick tricks for us to become better at it?
First of all, ask your gut. Like if you say, I just know they're saying this, you're probably right. So don't attack it, even articulate it out loud. And then start to, here's what I hope they're not thinking. Well, they're thinking that. So your gut, what you want to get rid of, what you want to deny, what you're afraid they're going to be thinking, your gut's probably telling you exactly what they're thinking. So then don't attack it, say it out loud.
I love that. And I think you even have a name for that strategy. We're going to get there. But I want to frame this next part of our conversation. I want to talk specifically about how we can all think about building our influence and our ability to negotiate, in particular when we're not necessarily the person who's holding all the cards in a work situation.
Right.
Most of us some of us this is not true, but most of us are not the CEO. We're not the big boss. We're trying from wherever we are inside our organizations to be heard, respected, and to move our opinions forward.
Right.
What are some tools we can use to start to do that?
Well, you start by expressing their point of view first. And not what you wish they were thinking, but what you know they are thinking. And then you start to condition yourself and understand the environment. So you're talking to your boss.
Yeah.
Here's the harsh reality. Nobody walks into the boss's office unless they want something. You don't roll in the boss's office and say, hey, look, how can I make your life easier and not get paid more for it? Nobody says that.
No, not going to happen.
So the problem is bosses are conditioned to view employees as selfish.
Yeah.
Because nobody walks in there to help the boss. They always walk in there asking for stuff for themselves.
Sure.
Understand the reality of that. Empathy is, how does the other person see it? Look, I'm probably going to look like another selfish employee. They'll be like, oh, wow. And suddenly they're listening. You go in and ask for a raise. Realize what the boss is hearing. All right, so what you want is to get paid more for doing the same amount of work. That's what they're hearing.
Yeah.
So you got to recognize what they're hearing. And even saying it out loud instantly breaks the ice.
Right.
You're instantly different from everybody.
Right.
And that's when you go from this power, out of the power dynamic and into the influence dynamic.
I love that. You are announcing the problem that you are bringing as a problem so that your boss can get past it and begin with you to collaborate on the solution.
Yeah, because then the boss are saying, like, you don't understand.
Okay, this first question comes from Stephen Barber. He's right here in New York with us. Stephen says, hey, when the other side holds all the cards, your future salary, next promotion, how do you control the conversation without giving away your power?
The secret to gaining the upper hand in a negotiation is giving the other side the illusion of control. First, let go of the idea of control. And think influence, think upper hand, think guiding. Control is a bad thing. Control is tunnel vision. Control is fear-based. Let them be in control. Let them feel in control. First of all, then you're no longer in a power struggle over who's in control. You're not going to win that with your boss anyway.
Yeah.
So if your boss is talking to you in some way or another, how do you make the boss's future better? That's the negotiation. You know, your salary pays your bills. It doesn't build your career. Yeah. You want a discussion with your boss about building your career. You want to let them know you're there for the A game, that you're a team player to make everybody's life better. Then your salary follows as a result. Or if it doesn't follow, you've built your resume where somebody who values you is going to pay you.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how you are assuming, you're taking for granted in this conversation that your boss has your best interests in mind, generally, right? So this question comes from Dan Green in the United Kingdom, who asks, well, how do you negotiate with someone who clearly doesn't have your best interest in mind?
You terminate and move on.
That feels like a key lesson.
In hostage negotiation, we were successful about 93% of the time, which meant about 7% of the time it ain't happening. And my former boss, Gary Nessner, came up with a new protocol called Indicators of High Risk, which is how do you spot that they're never going to make the deal, accept the reality, and then take appropriate measures to move on.
Yep.
And so if you work for someone that does not have your best interests in mind, you're in the wrong place.
Yep.
They're going to suck the life out of you. They're going to make you unhappy. You could be really well paid, and it's blood money. Yeah. And you're going to look back on it, and it will have cost you more than you got by being there. So the harsh reality is a bad partner, a bad boss, a bad company, bad values. You will not flourish as a human being there. There's a place for you to flourish. And that sounds really harsh, and it's just you got to believe in the universe. And you will find out that when you move on, your life got better.
I feel like we can only ever really learn that by doing it. Yeah. And it's a lesson we learn over and over, but it's so critical. Yeah. Okay, this question comes from Jenny Flora in Atlanta, and I love it because it really applies to every life situation. Do you begin negotiation at the outset, even in the most casual of situations?
Well, it depends upon how you define negotiation. I define it as collaboration with the goal of a long-term trusted relationship. Yeah. So I'm going to gather information about you. I want to be very curious about you. I want you to feel like I am actually intensely curious about you as a human being. Because the negotiation has begun. We're negotiating for trust. We're negotiating for a long-term relationship. Or do our core values line up? So, I'm trying to get to know somebody from the very early on because I want to know if I want to be in a long-term relationship with you, whether it be business or personal.
Look, you've got some really powerful tools for getting to knowing somebody very early in a relationship. And I just want to pause here to reflect on a couple of them. And I'm just going to call you out on doing it with me. Your voice slows down. I think you actually have a name for this voice, the FM radio voice.
The late night FM DJ voice.
Yeah, how do those things serve to build trust and to control a situation right from the outset?
Kind of your first move in a negotiation is to remove yourself as a threat because then the other person's guard is not up. And so the late night DJ voice, ideally with a smile.
It works, by the way. I'm immediately relaxed.
It triggers neurochemicals. It's not a psychological reaction. It's a neurochemical reaction.
Yeah.
So calm is contagious, and positive emotions are contagious.
Yep.
I would love for you to be calm so negative emotions are not getting in your way. You don't feel defensive. You're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. So if I can calm you down and put you in a positive mood, you think better, you see patterns quicker, you sense genuineness faster.
Yeah.
It puts us in a position to be able to collaborate much sooner just based on my tone of voice.
Well, listen, this question actually comes from Bangkok. It comes from Jirapan. Thank you for this question. How can we clearly show our value to justify a big salary jump? And how should we handle questions about past salary in negotiations?
All right, so if it's someplace you've already been, you've been there for a while, find a way to actually show them, because they're looking at the metrics, and how much value you have to have. Like if you're worth what I pay you, I've lost money on you. If you're worth 125% of what I pay you, we may have broken even. So for you to keep the lights on for everybody else, if you're worth double what I pay you, you're a good investment. And if I have any brains at all, I'm going to want to keep you. And you can always make the case for more money. So first of all, be able to demonstrate exactly how your value was monetized over the last year. And because they got taxes to pay, they got bills to pay. You got to be able to show them how it was worth in dollars. The game-changing question, and I learned this from a guy I grew up with, Tom McCabe. He's a CEO of an international bank. He and I grew up in the same small town. Every job Tom's ever gotten and every annual raise, salary increase he does, his question is the same. How can I be guaranteed to be involved in projects that are critical to the strategic future of the organization? Mm. And that question is, how do I make everybody's life better? Yeah. Boss, how do I look out for you? How do I help you get paid more? How do I help everybody get paid more? And I'm doing the entire sales team for a company 3 or 4 years ago. One of the salespeople said, the CEO on the Zoom call says, how do we negotiate with this guy? And there's like dead silence. And I repeat that question. And before anybody could say a word, he said, I wish everybody in the company would ask me that question. Mm. So that's how you build a future with the people that you work with. If you tell them, I want to be in a big game. I want to play in a championship. I want to play on a championship team. That changes you from the selfish employee who wants to get paid more for the same amount of work,
right,
to the guy or gal who's going to take us places.
The ambitious superstar whose team you want to be on.
Exactly. That's right.
That is how we know we are winning, folks. I'm really interested, Chris, in that idea of chunking things down.
Yeah.
And specifically, I'm interested in, when we actually do the volley back and forth, when we're negotiating for pay, how do we start and how do we know we're moving to an end?
Well, you start by designating that you want to be successful.
Yeah.
Another great question is, what does it take to be successful here?
Let me ask you a little bit differently, the question that I'm really curious about.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say, even as I say this to you, I'm thinking that I'm going to sound a little like selfish and in it for myself when you've just put out a conversation about strategy. But let's say I know I want to land at $150,000, and that is a lot more money than my boss is paying me right now.
Right.
Where do I start that conversation on the economic side?
First of all, when you start talking numbers, you got to start talking in a range. Now, I understand they got a range in mind before they sit down. And can they afford to pay you what you want? And if they can afford to pay you, is it going to blow the whole structure all across the line? So if you're a very valued employee and you're not worth what you're asking, and I articulate your ask, is it going to have a negative consequence on the entire organization, which could happen. So you got to look at the team. And, yeah, you want to be ambitious. But when you get there, then also you got to realize I've had people – I had one student at Georgetown who was absolutely convinced he wanted to land at $110,000 at the time. This is probably 8-9 years ago, and found out that they were ready to pay him more. But he was so adamant at 110, he could have got 125, but he was focused on 110.
Oh.
And he found out later on he cheated himself out of $15,000. Again, never be so sure what you want that you wouldn't take something better.
Sure.
So you want to begin to engage a conversation to see kind of what they have in mind and how they see you. And do they have a different spot for you? You got to be really careful about being certain that you need a certain number.
Yeah.
Because you may be coming in low.
That's
you never want to eliminate that possibility.
A great point. Okay, this question comes from Michael Behan in Ireland. He is very curious about how we know when negotiation is over. He asks, I guess you could never walk away from a hostage negotiation, but should you always have a walk-away point, even if it's a situation you need to succeed with?
The negotiation is over really when you're talking about implementation.
Yeah.
Yes is nothing without how. It doesn't matter what you agreed to. If you haven't talked about how's it going to be implemented, how's it going to be measured. So you understand you're really sort of at the end of setting terms when you start talking about what the future is going to look like to implement those terms.
Yeah. Let's talk common mistakes, right? We've talked a lot about strategies that work. What are the kinds of things that you see that people just always mess up with, where you feel like they could quickly make a fix?
Needing to go first in what you want. Because then you're cutting yourself out of valuable information, which you need. Going first in what you want doesn't really help the relationship. You need a better relationship. So articulating, explaining first what you want.
Why do we do that? I'm just thinking about it back and forth, right? Like you're sitting across from a hiring manager. You're pretty close to, I think we're going to hire you. What would you like to make? Well, what would you like to offer? Well, let me know what would you like to make. In that moment, I, as the job seeker, I am nervous. I'm going to go first because it's just going to blat out of my mouth.
Right.
Can you give me a tool for that moment?
Before you sit down, they have a range. They have a budget. They have a somewhat restricted view of the possibilities. And I've taught people to say, sounds like you got a range in mind. And you get an answer. That's called a label. And there's something about the collaborative, inviting aspect of using the label that is the quickest way to pull information out of people without making them feel like it was pulled.
Yeah.
They got a range in mind. They do. They're dying to tell you. Also, it doesn't make them feel cornered.
Sure. Well, look, disciples of your work are going to be very familiar with this idea of a label. What are labels, and why do they help us?
A label is a phrase, it's a verbal observation. It seems like, it sounds like, it looks like, it feels like. Mm-hmm. It's just making a verbal observation. It's incredibly inviting. It's the quickest way for me to get information out of you without you feeling interrogated or cornered. And also when you're tired.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for you to communicate with me. And everybody starts to get decision fatigued somewhere about 11 o'clock in the morning on for a variety of reasons. Circadian rhythms, night's sleep, nutrition, what you had to eat that day, how much you encountered that day. So the more decision fatigued you are, the harder it is for you to give me information except on a label.
This next question comes from Connecticut, from Bill Lucas. From Never Split the Difference, one trick was to reply, "How am I supposed to do that?"
Right.
What if they reply, "That's your problem"?
Right. They just told you who they are. How am I supposed to do that is a way to begin to indicate no. It's a way to try to pull empathy out of the other person. It's a way to focus on implementation. It's a way to let people know that there's difficulty in implementation.
Yeah.
And somewhere between 7 and 8 times out of 10, which is a very high percentage rate, it instantly transformed the negotiation in your favor. And a lot of people have used it a number of times, like, wow, changed everything. And then, how am I supposed to do that? And the person goes, it's your problem. And I say, it didn't work. And my answer to them is, no, it worked. You got different data. Mm-hmm. They just told you who they are. They told you that they're not going to help you.
Yeah.
They told you that they don't care how difficult the implementation is, how much it hurts you. They told you they're totally self-centered. This is great information, because now you got to go like, do I want to retain a relationship with this person?
Yeah.
Because they're never going to look out for me. Now, if I do, now to be forewarned is to be forearmed. I'm on my own here. They do not have my back. You may need to make that deal. Don't kid yourself about who you're dealing with. It's okay to have a tiger by the tail as long as you know you're hanging on to a tiger and not a pussycat.
Yeah. I would imagine your next volley after that takes you in a different direction, or you need to reconceive of like how you move forward with someone who doesn't have your best interest in mind, but you still have to complete a deal with.
And it's great to talk this through, because you want to think through basically the next 2 or 3 moves only.
Yeah.
Because the chessboard's going to reset after 3 moves.
Yep.
But if they hit you with that, you can genuinely say, sounds like I'm kind of on my own on this one.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate observation.
A label.
It's a label. Yeah, it might wake them up. You need to know if you could wake them up.
Now I've got a question for you. This one coming all the way from Armenia, from Era, who says, can you elaborate on cultural differences while negotiating? I witnessed that one method may work in one country while it'll be a complete failure somewhere else.
So no matter what culture you're in, you're human.
Yes.
Which means you were born with the core emotions. You also have neurochemicals which react the same regardless of culture. You run into cross-cultural problems when you start thinking your culture is the way things should be done. That's disregarding the other person's point of view. Empathy is about how the other person sees it.
Yeah.
So cross-cultural problems really run into the fact, like, I'm an American, and I want to, in the Middle East, I want to drink beer instead of coffee. Well, no, that's being self-centered. That's cultural imperialism.
Yeah.
Meet people where they are. Start articulating how they see things, and then they'll guide you in. Then whatever mistakes that you make, because you're trying to get it right with them, they'll help you. And
right.
So really, when one thing doesn't work in one culture, works in one and doesn't work in another, you're kind of being focused on your culture first as opposed to the human being in front of you.
What was your first experience in a negotiation situation, and what did you learn from it?
Wow. Okay. So that would kind of come as definition of first experience in a negotiation situation. Like if you're talking about hostage negotiation, I'd been volunteering on a suicide hotline here in New York City for several years before I got into, because I was told to go do that to learn emotional intelligence. And, I learned it on the hotline. That was negotiating behavior change. And then consequently, I was involved in what effectively is a unicorn event, which is a bank robbery with hostages where there's negotiations. Doesn't happen like ever. Bank robberies with hostages, bad guys always gone before the police show up. Mm-hmm. Very rarely are they caught inside. And then there, I just leaned into the stuff that I did on the hotline.
And that was the early 1990s bank robbery in Park Slope, New York?
Yeah. And it was last century, But humans are still humans.
Humans are still humans. Okay, this question comes from Bruce in the U.S. If someone recognizes your techniques and is familiar with them, would you modify your approach?
No. Everybody in my company negotiates with my techniques with me. The real issue is, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to collaborate with me? Or are they trying to take advantage of me? If they're using my techniques, we'll get with me, we'll get to an outcome faster. They'll help me think. We'll waste less time. We'll really listen to each other. If they're using them against me, my gut will tell me that early on. I'll test them a little bit to make sure, and then I'm out. I'm going to say, look, I'm sorry. Doesn't seem like we can make a deal. Let me know when you want to collaborate.
Yeah. So I think one thing that is really important in what you just said that I'm hearing is that these techniques aren't about beating or besting anyone.
They are not.
They're about moving more succinctly to the point of potential collaboration.
Yes. Yeah, well said. We've got one client who was phenomenally good at cutthroat negotiations, and he told us that. And he's a guy that has a company that sells to the big box retailers that are famous for cutting their suppliers' throats.
Yeah.
And he told me a couple of years ago, I made more money being collaborative than I ever made being cutthroat.
Yeah. And that's something to really keep in mind.
Yeah.
I would be remiss not to ask you about my favorite of your strategies before we're done today, which is this idea of starting any conversation or negotiation with a no, because somehow it opens us up to yes.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, people feel safe and secure when they say no.
Yeah.
It's a Pavlovian response. And, I like to think we open people up to agreement, which is not necessarily yes. Yes in its best form is aspirational. Yes is nothing without how. I want a agreement, which is that's right. Because yes is confining. But no is, when you say no, you feel safe. You feel like you protected yourself. So consequently, if you feel safe and protected, you think things through. And the other person can give me information without feeling like they're digging themselves more into a hole. So I'll say, are you against? Is this ridiculous? Do you disagree? And they'll be like, no, I don't disagree, but here are the following issues. And they'll lay real stuff out for me. And that's really where I want to go. So there's a Pavlovian response to saying no. Might as well trigger it.
That was Chris Voss, the former lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. His book is called Never Split the Difference. You can find it wherever books are sold. And folks, there is so much for you to put into practice from today's conversation. I'm going to leave you with 3 big thoughts, and I want you to try all 3 this week. Number 1, name the feeling. Chris uses this practice of labeling the emotion that someone else is feeling right out loud to great effect. It essentially disarms the person that you're speaking with and makes it so much easier to actually communicate. Number 2, let go of control and embrace collaboration. Chris will tell you this. When you strong-arm someone, it doesn't work. It just puts them on guard. But when you work together, that's when you get somewhere. Number 3, and you definitely heard it in this conversation, Chris's late night FM DJ voice. Take a minute, slow your speech down, and watch the power it gives you as the people around you slow down to meet your pace. It diffuses any situation. Truly, it's magic. Now, we're going to play a lot with these ideas. We're going to talk about them and explore them at office hours this week. I hope you'll come. We get together at 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday afternoons. You can always find us by going to the LinkedIn news page or following me on LinkedIn. We'll also drop a link in the show notes. Now, if you liked this episode, if it meant something to you, if there's anything in it you're going to put into practice, well, then share it with someone. It will really help other people find the show and help Chris's words get out. Thanks so much for being with us in the studio today. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday, and we will be right back here next Monday morning.